"You still live in that tiny house on Sycamore Street?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was particularly cruel, though Cheryl Montgomery had a talent for slicing skin with sugar-coated words, but because of the way she said it. Like the house wasn't just small but pathetic. Like living there was proof that I had failed. We were standing just a few feet inside the ballroom of the Wexford Country Club, where the Greenfield High Class of 1988 had gathered to celebrate 40 years since graduation. The air was heavy with perfume, nostalgia, and Chardonnay-induced arrogance. I looked around and instantly regretted coming. Everyone else seemed to have arrived in clusters. Laughing, hugging, swapping stories. I had walked in alone. Some things don't change. I tucked a strand of silver blonde hair behind my ear and met Cheryl's eyes. Same icy blue. Same perfectly arched brows. Same smirk she wore in senior yearbook photos. She hadn't changed a bit. But I had. I offered her a small, polite smile. "I do actually. It's quiet. Peaceful." Paid off. Pause. Just long enough to let the meaning sink in. Cheryl blinked. Her smile didn't falter, but her nostrils flared just slightly. Beside her stood her forever shadow Tina Laramie, who let out a breathy laugh and said, "Well, that's one way to live." I felt the old weight return, pressing against my chest. It wasn't anger or shame. Not anymore. It was memory. Of a hallway locker slamming shut behind me in 11th grade. Of Cheryl whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "No one's ever gonna love a girl who smells like library books." They used to call me Mouse. I had a soft voice, crooked teeth, clothes from garage sales. I read during lunch. I was a ghost in the cafeteria, a rumor in the yearbook, a punchline at prom. But I had learned something in the decades since. Ghosts don't disappear. They haunt. I hadn't come to the reunion to brag. I'd nearly thrown away the invitation. Twice. But something about the way it was worded, "an unforgettable night with unforgettable people," irked me. Because I had been perfectly forgettable back then. No. Now I had a secret. One no one here knew. Cheryl leaned in conspiratorially. "You still working at that, what was it? Community center? Or was it a church thing?" I shook my head. "Neither." He waited for more. I didn't give it to her. Let the silence do the talking. "Must be nice being retired," Tina chirped, eyes scanning my dress. It wasn't flashy, but it was tailored, expensive. I had spent more on the shoes than I'd made in a week at my first job. "I'm not retired," I said, still smiling. "Actually, I've been a little busy this year." I let that hang in the air like the scent of something delicious they couldn't place. A flash of irritation crossed Cheryl's face. "Well," she said, glancing over my shoulder at someone she probably considered more important. "It's great to see you, Lenora. You look, well." She didn't mean it. But I took the compliment anyway. I turned and walked toward the bar, leaving behind their whispers, just as I'd left behind their judgment decades ago. As I waited for the bartender to finish pouring my drink, I glanced around the room, at the banners, the balloons, the photo collage on the wall featuring faces frozen in adolescent confidence. I spotted my old yearbook photo in the bottom corner. And for a moment I saw her again. The girl with quiet eyes, a threadbare backpack, and a dream she never dared say out loud. No one had seen her then. Not really. But they were about to. Because in less than an hour the guest speaker would be announced. And the woman they used to call Mouse? She had just hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. After the reunion invite arrived, I sat with it unopened on my kitchen counter for almost 2 weeks. Not because I didn't know what it would say, but because I knew exactly how it would make me feel. High school was never cruel in the obvious way. No one shoved me into lockers or dumped my books in the hallway. They didn't need to. Indifference can cut deeper than insults. I was born and raised in the same house I live in now. Yes, the tiny house on Sycamore Street. Back then it felt even smaller. My mother worked the early shift at the diner. My father left when I was 10. I learned early how to keep things quiet. Keep things neat. Keep things to myself. Books were the one place no one could interrupt me. I used to sit under the maple tree in our yard with a notebook and a pen, writing stories in tiny cursive that only I could read. I didn't tell anyone I wanted to be a writer. Writers were people who lived in cities with high ceilings and gallery walls. People who wore scarves in the summer and had names like Esme or Julian. I was just Lenora. The girl with the scuffed shoes and the perfect attendance record. My classmates never asked what I wanted to be. I remember one moment that's lived in the back of my mind for decades. Buried but not forgotten. Senior year. Creative writing class. We were asked to read our short stories out loud. I had stayed up until 3 a.m. writing mine, an eerie, slow-burn mystery about a girl who vanished from her own life. When I finished reading, the room was dead silent. Not out of awe, out of discomfort. Then Cheryl, from the back of the room, let out a single snort of laughter. She really thinks she's gonna be the next Stephen King. The class laughed. Even Mr. Carmichael, our teacher, smiled politely and said, "That was imaginative, Lenora." After class, I folded the story into 4 pieces and threw it away in the girls' bathroom trash bin. I didn't write again for 15 years. Life took over instead. Right after high school, I got a job at a local insurance office. I filed paperwork, answered phones. At 25, I married a man named Joel Myers, a quiet contractor who brought home takeout on Fridays and kissed me on the forehead every morning. We were married for 11 years. He died in his sleep at 38. Heart failure. No warning. And just like that, the tiny house on Sycamore Street became even quieter. I didn't have kids. Not by choice, not really by plan either. Life just moved that way. People around me had babies, promotions, lake houses. I had a garden, a library card, and grief I didn't know what to do with. And still, somehow I kept showing up. Groceries. Book club. Smile when someone talks. Nod when someone complains. Fade into the background. Until the day something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning bolt or movie montage moment. It happened while I was standing in line at a used bookstore downtown. An older woman in front of me was trying to return a memoir she'd finished reading. The clerk told her they didn't accept memoirs unless they were bestsellers. The woman laughed and said, "Well, mine would be, if I ever wrote it." Something about that sentence stuck to me like burrs on denim. That night, I pulled an old notebook out of a dusty drawer. Same one I'd used in high school. And I wrote the first line of a story I hadn't dared tell until now. The first sentence took me 2 hours. I must have written it 12 different ways. Changing verbs, flipping phrases, deleting the whole thing and starting over. The notebook in front of me looked like a battlefield. Ink crossed out, rewritten, circled. Notes in the margins. Half-thoughts. Self-doubt. It had been so long since I'd written anything that mattered. And the words didn't come easily. They had to claw their way out. But when I finally got that first line down, she had spent so long being small that she forgot she could be anything else. Something inside me clicked. I wrote for 5 hours straight that night. Not everything made sense. Some pages were rambling. Some chapters led nowhere. But it was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not at work, not in my book club, not even my sister in Portland who still calls every Sunday like clockwork. It felt too fragile. Too you. Like saying it out loud might scare it away. At first, writing became a secret habit. After work, I'd brew a pot of tea, sit at the kitchen table, and disappear into a world of my own design. It wasn't some epic fantasy or gritty crime drama. It was a story about a woman who had been forgotten, by the world, by her family, by herself. And what happened when she stopped apologizing for taking up space. It was fiction, of course. But anyone who's ever written a novel knows. The truth leaks in. I called it the Hollow Room. When I finished the first draft 7 months later, I printed it out at the local UPS store and held the pages in my hands like they were something sacred. 284 pages of proof that I still had a voice. Submitting it was a different beast entirely. I researched how to write a query letter, studied literary agent databases, joined an online writing forum full of usernames like WriterGal99 and Ink and Tea. And then I sent it out. 5 queries. Then 10. Then 20. The rejections came quickly at first. Some were form letters. Some were kind but firm. A few never replied at all. One agent wrote back with a single line. "There's no market for quiet women over 50. That one stung. But I kept going. Not because I was brave, believe me I wasn't, but because something had shifted. For the first time in years I wanted something. And that hunger was louder than my fear. Rejection 73 came on a rainy Tuesday. I remember because I had just burned dinner, the power had flickered twice and the cat threw up on the rug. I opened the email expecting another no. But it wasn't a no. It was from a woman named Clara Voss, an agent with a boutique literary agency in Brooklyn. She had read my manuscript in one sitting. She used words like raw, honest, sharp, vital. He wanted to talk. When I read the email, I didn't jump or scream or cry. I just sat there, completely still, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. Someone had seen me, really seen me. It would be another year before the book was published. Another 6 months after that before it started to sell. But that night, that was the moment I knew. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming. The first time I saw my name in a bookstore, I stood there for 10 full minutes before I could move. Oh, Hayes, that's how they'd printed it on the cover. My publisher said initials tested better. Broader appeal. Less niche. Whatever that meant. I didn't argue. Let them think I was a man or a mystery. Let the story speak before the assumptions did. The Hollow Room sat between Lisa Jewell and Kristen Hanna on the new fiction shelf at Barnes & Noble, bright and strange and utterly real. I reached out and touched the spine, half expecting my hand to go through it like a ghost. It had been out for 3 weeks. Sales had been modest. But then quietly and without fanfare it started spreading. First a small online book club picked it up. Then a TikTok account with a few 100,000 followers called it a punch to the soul in a velvet glove. Reviews poured in. Emails from women who said they saw themselves in the pages. Single mothers, widows, quiet girls grown into invisible women. They said they felt less alone. That did something to me. I had spent so much of my life not taking up space that I didn't know how to handle this sudden public attention. My publisher arranged a signing at a little bookstore in Montpelier. 20 people showed up. It was 20 more than I expected. One of them, a woman around my age, stood at the back holding a dog-eared copy of the book. She waited until everyone else had left. Then she came up and said, "I didn't know anyone else felt like this." I didn't say anything clever or profound. I just hugged her. Because what else do you say to someone who's been lonely in the exact same shape you have? A week later I got the call. Claire, my agent, was breathless. "You hit the list," she said. "Lenora, you're on the Times." I didn't understand at first. What list? The New York Times. Hardcover fiction. Number 7. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. Just lowered myself to the tile and laughed. The kind of laugh that has nothing to do with humor and everything to do with disbelief. All I could think about was that story I threw away in high school. The one Cheryl laughed at. The one Mr. Carmichael called imaginative. If only they could see me now, I thought. And I remembered the invitation. The reunion. The glossy postcard buried in a stack of unpaid bills and grocery receipts. I had meant to toss it. Or maybe burn it. Instead I picked it up. I RSVP'd that night. Not out of spite. Not even revenge. But because for the first time in my life, I wasn't ashamed of where I came from. I was ready to walk back into that room. Not as the girl they ignored. But as the woman they never saw coming. The ballroom lights had dimmed just enough to cast a soft, flattering glow over the crowd. Champagne glasses clinked. Old music hummed through speakers. Someone was telling a story too loudly near the shrimp cocktail table. I stood near the back, a glass of seltzer in my hand, my nerves too alive for anything stronger. Every few minutes, someone passed by and gave me that same half-glance, that same polite nod reserved for the vaguely familiar. They didn't recognize me. And why would they? Lenora Hayes had never been invited to sit at their tables. She didn't go to prom. She didn't make the yearbook superlatives. She wasn't most likely to succeed. She wasn't anything at all. Till now. I glanced toward the podium at the front of the room where a man in khakis and a navy blazer was clearing his throat into a microphone. Derek something. Former student council. Current dentist. He tapped the mic like he was opening for a TED Talk. "And now," he said with the same fake enthusiasm as a cruise ship director, "we'd like to take a moment to recognize one of our very own. Someone who's made a name for themselves in the world of publishing." A few heads turned. With a debut novel that hit number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list this month. Now people were really listening. Cheryl stopped mid-sentence. Tina's wine glass hovered midair. And whose work has been described as devastatingly honest and impossible to put down. He smiled. "Please welcome Hayes." There was a moment of collective confusion. A few scattered claps. People looking around, expecting someone taller, younger, glossier. Then I stepped forward. And everything stopped. Cheryl's face shifted first. From mild interest to confusion, then something close to disbelief. Tina actually gasped. I walked toward the podium slowly, not for drama, but because I wanted to remember every single second of it. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor. The sudden hush. The realization dawning in their eyes. Mouse had written a bestseller. The woman who sat alone in the cafeteria. The one they never invited, never noticed, never asked a single meaningful question. I smiled as I reached the microphone. "Hello," I said calmly, clearly. "I'm Lenora Hayes." Stillness. Not one fork moved. Some of you might remember me from homeroom or maybe not. I tended to blend in. That was kind of my thing back then. A polite laugh from somewhere in the back. A few nods. But mostly silence. I just wanted to say thank you. Because you see, I've spent most of my life writing in the dark. Quietly. Privately. Without anyone expecting anything from me. Which is actually a gift, in a way. When no one sees you coming, they can't tell you where to stop. I paused, letting the weight of it settle in the room. I wrote a book about being invisible. About what it feels like to disappear without anyone noticing. And somehow, people noticed. Which still amazes me. I looked directly at Cheryl. And I think that's worth celebrating. The room erupted into applause. Real applause this time. Not just polite, but something deeper. Warmer. Clara always said readers don't care about the hype. They care about truth. And in that moment, surrounded by the same people who once looked through me, I stood in the center of the room. Seen, heard, and unforgettable. As I stepped down from the podium, Cheryl stopped me. She opened her mouth, searching for something clever, something dismissive. But all she managed was, "I didn't know you were writing." "I know," I said gently. "You didn't ask." And I walked away. Not with triumph. Not with spite. But with peace. As I had nothing to prove. I had already written it down. The next morning I woke up early. Not out of habit. Not because I had somewhere to be. Just because the sunlight came through the window a certain way, soft and golden, like it knew. I padded into the kitchen, still barefoot, still in the dress I hadn't bothered to hang up the night before. I poured a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch of my tiny house on Sycamore Street. It was quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet I used to dread, but the kind you earn. The kind that fills you instead of draining you. I sat in the rocking chair that had belonged to my mother, tucked my feet beneath me, and opened the copy of The Hollow Room that I'd kept for myself. It was worn at the corners. Marked up with little notes I'd made along the way. There was a coffee stain on chapter 9. I used to think that success would feel louder. Flashbulbs. Red carpets. Fancy hotels with mirrored elevators. But that wasn't what stayed with me. It was the woman who waited until everyone else had left the book signing just to say, "I didn't know anyone else felt like this." It was the email from a 70-year-old widow who said my book made her cry in the laundromat. It was the girl I used to be, frightened, scribbling in notebooks, hiding her heart on the page, finally feeling like she hadn't wasted her voice. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge is warm. It's quiet. It's drinking your morning coffee on your front porch while the world hums along, unaware of how much you've survived. It's knowing you've become someone even your past self couldn't have imagined. Later that day I got an email. It was from Mr. Carmichael. He'd read the book. He said he remembered me as shy but promising. And that he was proud of the writer I'd become. I didn't respond right away. Instead I closed the laptop and let the moment sit there whole and perfect. Because I didn't need his validation anymore. I had my own. And if anyone asks someday what it felt like, how it felt to walk into a room full of people who once forgot you and leave unforgettable, I'll say this. Felt like turning a page. And finally finding yourself in the story.